John Miner, and I work for a company called Insight Digital Innovations. I've been working for and or as a partner with Microsoft for a good 10, 15 years, so it's been a long time. Hopefully this is year number 10 for my MVP award, so I enjoy learning, lifelong passion for learning and teaching. Classically trained from the University of Rhode Island, so if you know where New England is, I have an undergraduate degree in mathematics and computer science and an advanced degree in computer science. Back in the day, I remember building compilers, but we don't do that anymore. But it's all fun stuff. So we're going to talk about data engineering with Fabric. Fabric is a new thing that Microsoft came out with. And if you're curious, you can reach me at john.miner@insight.com. I have a lot of articles on SQL Server Central on Fabric. There's 18 of them this year being published. So if you want to catch up with what I'm doing and some of the demos, we'll be going over exactly what I talked about in the past on the actual articles. So purpose. So I usually wait until a product goes general availability because there's a few bugs usually. Okay, so Microsoft went GA in November of 2023. And basically, how can we leverage this new service and what's new, right? That's what we want to know. Right now, there are 4 types of problems can be solved. There's a Lakehouse, okay, and we're pretty comfortable with a Lakehouse. If you've done Synapse Spark or you've done Databricks, which I've done a ton of, you know what a Delta Lake is. There's the data warehouse, and that's brand new. They redesigned it. It's kind of cool. Data science. I got a certificate in data science. Unfortunately, I don't get a chance to use it in my day-to-day job. And the real-time analytics and real-time streaming, right? It's that Lambda thing, batch versus speed, okay? Today, we're going to explore how you can use Fabric in your organization, okay? So topics, we're going to talk about some architectural diagrams because, hey, we need a roadmap. How do we put things together, right? We're going to talk about OneLake. And this is the new concept. And kind of what was the foundations of this is basically the Delta file format went to open source, and that opened Microsoft for the use of the Delta format and the OneLake design, okay? We're also going to talk about the Lakehouse and the warehouse. We're going to skip any real-time streaming and topics as well as, machine learning. Okay, so let's talk about architectural diagrams. First one, we can see that Fabric's a big product, right? We got a lot of pieces here. But at the very bottom, we can see that's a unified data foundation. It's the OneLake, okay? So there's file storage, right? And within that file storage, it's using the Delta file format, okay? We have a lot of the pieces that we've seen before in Azure, but then now in this software as a service platform, okay? Before you have to worry about, okay, I stand up Data Factory, and how does Data Factory talk to, the data lakes? You'd have to make sure that the managed entity had rights to write to the data lake, and you'd have to set up link services. A lot of stuff is already taken care for you, okay, in the Fabric environment. Data engineering. That's basically notebooks, okay? So, and we'll get more into data integration, which has 2 paths, right? Pipelines. And they also have something called wrangling data flows, which is data flows Gen 2, and it's the M language. There's also the warehouse, like I said, that's been redesigned. It's cool. It's all based on Parquet, has time travel just like Delta tables. Skipping over data science and real-time analytics, there's no time to go over Power BI, but there's reporting. And data activate is like, hey, do something when something lands like a file, kick off maybe a pipeline, okay? So these are the typical analytic scenarios talked about again. So I'm going to skip right past the slide for time. Again, right in the Lakehouse. This is where we're going to do some work, okay? So the Lakehouse, okay, has 2 ways to get data into it. Well, I'd say there's more. There's basically something called a shortcut, and this is exciting, okay? This is like the new thing that Microsoft came up with. And what shortcut is, it's just basically a way to read-only look at other cloud vendors and basically your data meshing, okay? So if I had a Delta table or Delta file in, say, Google or AWS, or even Azure, okay? And I want to expose it into the Lakehouse, I just create a shortcut, okay? And the nice thing about shortcuts, it will handle up to a 1 gigabyte file, and you can turn on caching. So that means if you read it once, it won't get cached again. The only time you'll have to recache is, say, if you do some organization with your Delta table. Okay, so for instance, if you vacuum it and optimize it, so now you're changing the number of files, then yes, you'll need to reload the cache. But once it's in the cache, it'll stay there for 24 hours. As long as it gets read again, it gets, not thrown out of the cache, which is cool. Another thing we can do is bring data in using pipelines, right? Pipeline is an Azure Data Factory copy, say, activity, copy from point A to point B. That brings into the Lakehouse. Once we get in the Lakehouse, we can go ahead and do some transformation using notebooks and data flows. And then we can expose it as a SQL endpoint. Like if you've done Synapse, there's serverless endpoints in Synapse. There's SQL endpoints here. And the one for the Lakehouse is read-only. Okay, and that's the major difference between the warehouse and the Lakehouse is this is read-only, warehouse is read-write. Okay, data warehouse. This is an old slide deck, and I was talking to some of the product group recently because I was writing an article. Shortcuts are not actually available, and they're trying to work on it right now. So the main way to get data in is to use a pipeline or to stage it, say, in Azure Storage and use the copy into command. Okay, we'll talk about the copy into. Usually when you do a warehouse design, you put it into a staging table, and then you transform the data from the staging table, say, to active tables or whatever schema you're doing, like, say, a star schema, using stored procedures. Okay, before we go in the Lakehouse, I'm going to check to see if there's any questions. Okay, hey, John Mosh, how you doing tonight? Know someone on the list. So excellent. So let's take a look, and I'm going to skip to some things I was actually doing beforehand. One thing is Fabric. You need to, if you're using Fabric, and let's show you the interface here, there's something called the workspace, and it kind of reminds me of Power BI, and it's based on it, right? So you got a workspace here. And under workspaces, I always forget the setting place, but I think it might be here. Okay, you can go ahead and you can do licensing. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm licensing a capacity, and the capacity is F8. So it's their nebulous shoe size of, hey, some compute, right? Well, that's the only thing that you really have to carve unless you're using a service principal to access other things, okay? And those two pieces, like say a service principal and the compute, actually come out of Azure. Now, the problem with that is you might say, hey, the compute's expensive. And especially since I only get so much money from Microsoft as an MVP to teach, I want to save that money, right? So we can see this is the compute right here, and we can do scale and we can change size. I'm not going to change it, but we can see if I left the F8 up, it'd be $1,000 a month. 12 months would be 12,000. Guess what? I'd be out of money. I'd be owing Microsoft money. I don't want to do that, right? So one way to solve that problem is logic apps, okay? There's a little sidestep. And guess what? You can create a logic app to start and stop, say, anything. This is my Postgres. The other day I was teaching class. So this stops and stops the Postgres database. This stops and starts the Databricks cluster. And again, this demo I'm showing you here is going to be an article that's coming up in SQL Server Central if you want more. Main thing we're talking about is Fabric. You can stop and stop Fabric, okay? So if you're curious, look for the article. Definitely a way to save money. So once we go into Synapse, right, we want to actually do something, right? We want to work with some data. So let's get back to the slide deck and talk about what we're going to work with. Okay, so what is Spark, right? Because basically that's what a Lakehouse is, and it's based on Apache Spark. Microsoft didn't write it from scratch. They might have made some enhancements to it, but it's definitely Spark under the covers. So there's two ways to deal with data. You can use it for data engineering. You can use a SQL syntax of Spark, or you can use data frames. You can also do machine learning and ML ops. We're not going to talk about that. If you need to do graph case, there's graph frames, and there's also streaming. This one doesn't really apply too much nowadays. You definitely can take a look at it, but if you're curious, there is a size for the compute that you created, and there's some executors. And given the number of CPUs, you will know that each CPU, this one has 8 cores. That means that at most I can have 8 tasks. So if I was doing some partitioning on big data sets, I want to use a number 8, okay? So let's talk about the medallion architecture. This is typical everyone's doing this nowadays. And what is medallion? And it's like, well, it's kind of like the Olympics, right? You got different medals you can have. Well, not really, but it's kind of, right? The reason why you have different metals is data quality. So when you move to bronze, from raw to bronze, right, you're going to use something to get in, a shortcut, a pipeline. Once it's bronze, there might be some data quality issues, right? When you go to silver, you want to clean up that data. So if you got duplicate addresses, maybe you need to look up, Bing Maps to fix an address. Maybe in gold, you're actually doing a dimensional model. That's what happens. You're basically from left to right making the data better, okay? What can you do? You can read from databases. If you look at my LinkedIn account, I just recently did a Postgres sample from Fabric on how to read a Postgres database from Fabric. There's something called environments. Environment allows you to modify, okay, the actual compute to add different things, like say a driver. And you need the Postgres driver, which is a jar, to actually read Postgres. Once you get the credentials, you can talk to it as long as it's in the cloud. And of course, my service is in the cloud, so it works. Okay, data ingestion. Um, Data Factory basically is really good at copying from point A to point B. It has a lot of connectors, okay? Once it does that, okay, um, you can start, calling notebooks to go from bronze to silver, silver to gold, right? Shortcuts. It's great for data meshing. We talked about you can talk to different places, right? Look for egress charges, right? Not a big deal. That's going out, in, don't get charged. Data gateway. Um, I forgot to pull this out. When I first started teaching this about April, the data gateway for Azure Data Factory was not available. Now this is wrong. It is available everywhere. If you remember, Azure Data Factory used to use the self-hosted integration runtime, okay? And I said there's two ways: the traditional pipelines, which is why I'm moving my, mouse around, Azure Data Factory icon down here. Also the Power Query data flows, which is, they used to call them Wrangling data flows. Everything gets a new name, but both of those are in Microsoft Fabric, okay? And I'd like to do a shout out to Radicad for the image there, but we can do data meshing on anything, GCP, Amazon, and AWS too. Okay, so data engineering. We talked about mapping data flows versus basically, regular data flows. I like regular pipelines, okay? Because you can parameterize them. We'll talk about that in a minute. Spark Notebooks got supported. New clusters I like. They're called startup clusters. They're really quick. They're already there, okay? Not big, but hey, if you're doing small stuff, it's perfect. Parameterization's easy and scaling's controlled, okay? So we're going to talk about two things you probably heard about before. Everyone talks about VentureWorks. So we're going to talk about VentureWorks. We're also going to talk about stock data, okay? And we're going to talk about the S&P 500, okay? Okay, it's a quiet group tonight. So if anyone has any questions, please, I'll just put it here, post here, questions. Okay. So let's do our first example. So we're going to go back into the workspace. Now we can see that I have a data warehouse. I have another data warehouse. This is for the pubs. And if you remember, pubs came out with SQL 6.5. I looked at it in 7.0. Stock data, right, which we were talking about, VentureWorks, some sample data here. This is sample data because I'm actually doing this for the community. I'm just taking some of these things and creating different formats, and I'll post it out on my GitHub. And last but not least, S&P 500 data, okay? So we can see these here. The question is, how do we get access to this, right? And the answer is any tool you want. I just logged in to the SQL endpoint, okay? So I found it. And as long as you have Entra ID, AD authentication, you can go ahead and query it. So now I'm looking at the pubs database, okay? And this is kind of like stay on a little thunder here, but I'm going ahead. And now I can see, oh yeah, I got DBO authors. And if I look, I'm actually looking at the warehouse here, okay? And I'm pulling it. The only difference is the warehouse is updatable. And I use DW as the prefix. I know it's a data warehouse. But if I'm curious, I could look at, say, maybe the same data. Let's look at the S&P 500. Okay, and I can look at tools. Okay, tables, and hopefully it comes up. And we do. And we can see now, this is a typical data lake, right? We have basically a bronze layer and a silver layer. And if I'm curious about the S&P 500 data for 2013, I can do this. Okay, and I see it. Did I create any views? I might have some views. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, I do. So I used to work for Microsoft. So let's look at the Microsoft stock data, right? So I select it. And we can see this in Microsoft stock data. And it has 2013, 14, 15, 17, 16. So it's all the data in there. And I actually have a view that actually does some summarization. So I'm kind of stealing a little thunder, and it gives me each month, year, max, and min. Okay. So did a little sidetrack there on the demo. Let's go and talk about getting data into the system. Okay. Anyone using laptop Mac, can you comment here? Okay, perfect. My Mac doesn't work to how to come. I rather can use my iPhone. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Medra. And if I got the name wrong, I apologize. Okay, so let's start with the first thing. One of the things we always want to do is a metadata-driven design. And again, I think this errored out. And that's why I was saying, hey, talk to the demo gods. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. And guess what? It looked like it worked anyways. So we'll do one. I'm not going to reload them all just in case it blows up. So what is metadata-driven design? A metadata-driven design is you put all the information you need to do for loading into a table, and then you drive the pipeline from the table. Okay. So this is just basically, there's no query here because I'm not an SSMS, right? And I can hit view files, but I can see the data here. So let's bring up the notebook. I'm going to workspace. Okay. My workspaces. If I get it right. Okay. And the interesting thing is, unlike other stuff with Power BI, this settings up here allows you to do a lot of the settings. If you're in a workspace, this allows you to change the settings for a workspace, like capacity and so on. Up here, what I was talking, it's like data gateways, settings for, Power BI, so on, okay? But what I'm really interested in is finding, I'm going to close it out, my workspace, the notebooks, right? So I could click clear Hive tables, and I don't want to do this because, again, I've had problems last time. I'm going to load one table. I'll manually do it. But this is typical Spark, right? Show me the tables, right? And for each table, if it's not metadata, drop it, right? It's just doing a drop, okay? Interesting that's different here versus if you use Databricks and or Synapse is that a lakehouse is basically kind of like a schema in a Hive metastore. And so in there, you can have files, right? So we have raw files, okay? And the interesting thing is, hey, we got raw file there, but what is this? I don't know what's going on here. There's a little thing right here. There's a little link. Oh my God, that's a shortcut, right? So we can see it's a shortcut. And I'm actually having some streaming data. Like I was writing an article recently, and I could see that I was streaming actually basically S&P 500 data. And I was playing around with, structured streaming in Databricks. But we can also see stocks, snacks, sales LT, Netflix data, all cool stuff. How do I know what it is? Well, I actually have a notebook out here, right? And if I can find it, it's the hardest thing. Let's see, it says the shortcuts. Let's run it. So this is like anything. We bring Lakehouse. We're going to go into S&P 500, right? Hopefully that's where we were a minute ago. Was I? Yes, I was. And what I'm going to do is, this one says, there's a package out there Microsoft wrote called Centrifugat. Okay. And it's basically a REST client. And what I can do is once I get that REST client, I can say, hey, give me a list of workspaces. Okay. So we're going to run this, and we can see we can connect to a high concurrency cluster or a new standard cluster. So I want a new cluster. And what I want to do is I want to know, where am I connected to raw? I forgot where I was going, right? And what we can do is we can use this library to figure that out. So we're going to import the library. Okay. And hopefully it goes a little faster than this. Otherwise, I'm going to have to cut some of the demo out. Okay. And so you know what? This one, basically, we're using a REST client. So we're going to create a client. Then we're just going to make some REST calls. Go to the Microsoft documentation. Everything in Azure is done in Fabric's done in REST. And I run this. And what this is going to do, I know right away when I come up here, see it says Crafty DBA. So this Crafty DBA is my workspace ID. Okay, so I popped that down here and I said, okay, give me the lake houses. And when I ran it, I see I have AdventureWorks, I have S&P 500 and sample data for lake houses. And I said, well, I want the lake house for S&P 500. So I'm going to copy not only the item ID from here, but now I'm also going to say, give me the workspace for the workspace ID, which I already set, and the item ID. So to make sure this probably works correctly, I probably should run them all. Okay, and I'm going to run this one. And what we can see now is that this is actually Azure storage. I'm going to a container called SA4 ADLS Gen 2 or 2030. And there's a path that's raw and bronze, okay? And I could find that if I want to. If I went back to my Azure subscription and I went to all resources and quickly did this filter on storage. Okay, I did not do that. Let me just do type equals storage. SQL Server, storage count, here we go. And now if we go to SQL tips, nope, storage count right here. Containers, okay, and now we can see we're going raws and bronze. And if we look, the Netflix and stuff, that matches right here. So that's how we're doing it. So a little off thing, we could do spark.read dot whatever format you want and just suddenly pull it in. Okay, so these are shortcuts, and this is the new exciting stuff that happened. Okay, you can also manually upload stuff. Okay, like for instance, if I wanted to upload a file, you can do that. There's also PowerShell. If you look at my SQL Sentry articles, you can use PowerShell. You can also use something called Azure Fabric Storage Explorer, Fabric Storage Explorer, and basically that looks just like Windows Explorer. You can drag and drop. Okay, so I showed you a little about basically using shortcuts and how to do this, and we can rebuild if we needed to. Like for instance, let's bring one of these notebooks up. Do I have the S&P 500? GCP? Nope. List shortcuts. That's the sample data. Maybe I got rid of it because I was cleaning up house, but good enough. So let's go back to we talked about the ingest stock data. Okay, and we talked about AdventureWorks. So let's take a look at the AdventureWorks one. Okay, so if we go ahead and take a look at the create metadata file, okay, it's basically we could drop it and then recreate it, but I'm more interested in taking a look at it. If we run it, okay, and when you do it, the only difference between Microsoft and Databricks when it comes to Spark SQL is double ampersand versus single ampersand. So I'm going to run this one cell, and it's going to show me the metadata. And then we're going to try to run a notebook to load one of them. And I'll go exactly through the notebook and I'll show you how it ties into the pipelines. So again, learning how to load. Okay, maybe it doesn't like me because I'm not wrong Lakehouse. That's the reason why. Okay, so this is one of the things you might run into. Notebooks can get pinned to a Lakehouse. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, guess what? Remove the Lakehouse. Try it. Continue. And stop it. So it's now going to kill my session. And now I'm going to add a existing Lakehouse. And I'm going to pick the right one this time. So I'm going to pick Lakehouse for AdventureWorks. Hit add. Okay. So okay, this is a different subscription. This is kind of weird. I am definitely in as myself, right? Crafty DBA, John at Crafty DBA. Metadata and zones. I didn't think this was here. Huh. Okay, let me try it one more time. Move on. And then I'm going to close out of this totally. Okay. Something went wrong. Great. Okay, let me sign out. Retry. Please work. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is where I was last time, which I don't need this one. Don't discard it. Okay, so we're doing the Lakehouse for EventWorks, which is this guy right here. Right? Perfect. Whew. Everything's perfect. It's there. Okay, so we can see this metadata. If we click on it, it will change the preview. We can see there's an entry for each one. For instance, we know that we're going to give each table a pipeline ID, and it's a job basically. And I want to read from raw sales dim currency CSV. There's no header on it. It's piped to limited. I'm going to this table called dim currency as my target. And guess what? I have to give it a schema because, it's the best way to read CSV files, okay? And I can see right there that all my metadata is here, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to open up the notebook that does a load one, okay? So we're going to load one. And what we can do is we can do load history or no history, okay? So we're going to do a full load as a test. And this is module testing, okay? To do module testing, we want parameters to the notebook, right? So we're going to give it a path. Say this is sales LT, right? Dim. Now this one's loading locally versus the other one's going against storage. What we can see, let's see if there's hopefully some storage locally. Raw. We got sales LT. And we can see our data is there. So it's going against sales LT, dim currency, and oh, wow, we got a bunch of the currency here. So the way I wrote this is sometimes, like if you were a candy bar, okay, owner, like Hershey's, you might want to know the recipe. So I'm having auditing. So in the bronze, I'm going to have all the audit tables. And we can see that in here, okay, there's actually a date, and the date is sortable. And that's really important because we're going to use that to find the max one. So we pass these parameters in. And what we're first going to do is we're going to drop both the bronze and silver. Then we're going to say, guess what? From paths, this is a shortcut. You don't have to do the full ABFS, right? Which is, I'm going to read it in. So it says if the schema is none, there's no schema. If not, we're going to trim it. And then we're going to pick one. If it's not schema, we're going to do a recursive lookup. So that means everything. Header, delimited, CSV. If there's no schema, it's this one. And if there is schema, it's this one. We're going to create a temporary view. Okay. That is going to go ahead and create a temporary view. Now, the first thing we want to do is, did we save it as a file? We did a red. We created a temporary view. Then we're going to create the bronze. Okay. So the bronze is everything. We're going to select it, but we're going to add some extra data. We're going to add a load date. Going to fully qualify the folder name, and we're also going to get the path from the input file, okay? And we can use the split command to do that. Then last but not least, we're going to go ahead and we're going to select star from this max folder, okay? And then only create a silver that's a single version, okay? So let's run this all and let's take a look. So it hasn't started yet. Now these, remember, this is parameters right here. You have to look really careful. There's a little setting on top that you can change it. You can only have one per file. Used to be that way. I don't know if they changed it. And so these are all my parameters. Let me see if there's any messages. No messages yet. Cool. Okay. Okay, the only thing I'm wondering, and sometimes this happens, is, okay, good. Sometimes this is my compute. If I didn't pay attention, I might have more compute running than I have services, my Fabric, CPU, and then I would have problems. Let's see, come on. It says connecting. Let's try this again. Let's do a new. It says starting session. Come on. Okay, now please start. I'm just going to double check to make sure I didn't do something like turn it off. Nope, it's active, so we do have compute. Okay, perfect. Now I'm just going to run all. So the first thing we're doing is we're going to go through and we're going to define these variables. When you use ADF, you're going to pass it as a parameter, and the parameter is going to come from the metadata, okay? So now this is going to drop it. So now if we take a look at the tables, okay, and see if we can catch it and hit a refresh, right? Oops, it dropped it. See, it's gone because that was the dim currency, right? It's gone. Awesome. Oh, go to cell. What did it fall into? Files. Add request. Shouldn't be because it's right there. Raw sales. Try this again. Okay, I know something was messed up with this demo when I was looking at it earlier. I'm going to take a quick look at it, and if not, we'll move on. So this one said that, oh, we can see right here, there's a variable path, right? And there's a temporary view, right? And it blew up here. The question is, where's path, right? For our path, it should have been here. So we can just do this really quickly, right? Print. Again, demo guide's not with me tonight. Path. Okay, so it likes it there. And our table should be there. So these are defined in the system. This one's a load, and it says something changed. Files. So this is path, files. So let's go over here and add another one and take a look at path. So if we do print path, okay, files / raw / sales LT. This is wrong because I must have changed it. There's no dim underscore currency, right? Sales LT and there's var table. So path equals var path. Okay, and then this has to be plus. I don't know if something happened to change here. This is var table, right? That's, and so where is this? This load path. I apologize. This is the path, that's a table. Why did this not get changed? Somehow this notebook got messed around with, so table is equal to, so this needs to be var path plus, right? Quote plus var table. Get this back on run. Okay. And let's look at path one more time, and if not, I will pass this demo and go on to the next one. Okay, so files, raw, sales LT, dim underscore currency, right? That's the folder. It's the path, and why is it complaining? It says, it's always demo problems. This was working before too. Let me go look at the other file because there's two files that are actually the same, and if not, I'm gonna run out of time. So let me explain what should have happened. I'll definitely get this fixed. Something changed in this demo. And again, like I said, I was cleaning up. Maybe I broke it. And if so, I apologize. But this is the full load, and then there's full without no history. That's the one we want to look at and see if there's a difference. Delimited full, no history, right? So this is the one that says no history. And raw. Okay, let's see if we can do this one. This one says raw stocks S&P 500. It removes it, right? But then files for our path strip. Yeah, see, this is files, stocks. Say data lake path. Load. Files, raw stocks, S&P 500. It might be the like, okay, so this actually is the right one. So let me look. This is raw. And raw, this would be stocks. Okay, I think this one will work. So we'll run this one. I'll show you how. So this is going to drop the table here and then rebuild this one. And then I'll show you the pipeline. And like I said, this article's out there, capacity. So again, remember I told you might hit capacity issues. I had this one that said full delimited load, succeeded. This one is list shortcuts is still running. So I want to stop that one. And then we're going to go back to this one with no history and we'll run all. Here we go. Come on. Still does it. Try and connect. Okay, there we go. Session. Open notebook to reconnect. So closed, closed. Try this again. Apologize. No history. And then we'll run this all again. Okay, so this one's going to be running 2013. So if it's correct, okay, it's going to drop to 2013, which should be right here, and then rebuild them. And again, the only difference is the metadata-driven design reads each row in the meta and data, and then just processes each row. Right now, we're waiting for this to start. So view code. Okay, so I'm having some problems tonight. And again, it might be just some pathing issue. See, it says 400. Okay, let's get back to the slide deck. But the main thing is, I showed you that there's two lakehouses here. We have some data. We can look at the endpoint through SQL. We can add stuff to the endpoint if we wanted to, right? We also talked about pipelines, right? So in the workspace right here, we can see the pipeline. Let's talk about the pipelines. So there's many different ways to get data in. For instance, I could grab data from AWS, right? If I have an account, right? I can clear the staging table. Okay, and this is for the stocks data. I can grab it, okay? And then grabbing it, guess what? We want to actually do a file listing, okay, of child items that gets the data. And then what we can do is we can filter for what we want and just copy it over, okay? So that's one way to get data in, right? We talked about getting it from different systems. The one we were talking about is VentureWorks, right? And we're going to show you this pipeline. So the pipeline for VentureWorks is refresh. Where is it? BL refresh VentureWorks right here. And it's this delimited full, so delimited loads right here. So it gets a pipeline ID 11. And what it's going to do is in the very first thing, it's going to do a lookup. So we can do preview data. And this is actually going to go ahead and pull in our metadata. And once the metadata is there, we can set the variable, right? So we can see right here, here's all number, our different places and all our schemas, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to set, okay, the folder because we're doing that folder, okay, which is a sortable date. And once that's set, and what we want to do is for each one, we're going to do a copy command followed by a notebook, okay? And that's all we're doing. There's no, we're only going from, the bronze to silver, right? So bronze would be the copy. And the copy, we can look, see this is container name, item, because it's for loop, file name. This is where we're getting from that 2030, which I already showed you. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy it. Destination is basically in storage. We could browse it. And this will show us the storage right here, right? We can see there's some variables requested. Doesn't allow me to preview data right here. And then last but not least, we're going to call a notebook, right? In the notebook, we want to do our parameters, right? So your path, your table, your delimiter, your header, and your schema. And that's what we did. And that's it. So I did see some questions. Hey, John, curiosity, context, how raw is different from Braun? I was wondering why dim and fax centers here. That's because I was using the VentureWorks. So that's why. Is it any day best to automate copy files in SharePoint? God help us, SharePoint, right? REST API was the way to do it in the old days. You would have to set up a service pencil. I've done that before. Okay. If you have any questions, just reach out to me. I hopefully can point you in the right direction, okay? As for the bronze, Yeah, it depends. Usually I'm doing EventWorks and it happens to be the EventWorks for Sales LT. So the DIMs are automatically showing up in both. I'm just copying over the data. It might be a bad example. And if so, maybe that's a good suggestion to change the examples. Also, this was working, so something happened in the environment. I'm curious now after this class that I want to take a look. So the warehouse, one lake uniform architecture. Let's talk about this. There's the warehouse syntax, and we're going to talk about two examples, and we have about 20 minutes to do this. Delta file format's the heart. Again, one lake's down here, okay? And we're going to actually concentrating on T-SQL, what we were doing before with Spark, okay? And let's click the next one. So what did I learn? The core objects are supported: tables, views, functions, store procedures. What you usually don't get in a warehouse, and it depends on whatever warehouse you're using, like Snowflake or using, Fabric, it doesn't usually support check constraints, okay? It doesn't support primary and foreign key constraints. There's no order increment columns. They added just recently alter table support. When I looked at this in April, there wasn't. There's limited support for views and procedures, so look at the documentation, okay? How you can get into it. You can use Data Factory, then ingest the external table into the tables. You can also copy into syntax is supported for storage, okay? So we're going to talk about stock data and the publisher's data. I'm going to go off and hope this example will work. The other ones didn't, but this one should because it's a Lakehouse and has nothing to do with the file pathing that seems to be messed up tonight, okay? So I'm going to go to the warehouse and we're going to bring my last one, GCP data, okay? And there's GCP data versus GCP data combined. We're going to use the GCP data combined. I have a container here, okay? And the container, okay, so this is basically going to clear the staging table, okay? And we're going to be working with the DW stock data. So let's take a look at that data warehouse, okay? So DW stock data, okay? Very simple. We have a table called S&P 500 here, okay? It's in actives. We also have a stage, okay? The staging table is like what you usually do. It's all numeric, so we don't want to get any typecasting issues, okay? And then the active table is right here. And what we can do is we can use a view. And in the view, if we take a look at it, going to do alter. We're actually doing a casting, okay? So we're going to try to cast the date to a date, all the stock data to reals, the volume to a big int, and then we're going to use that to import into the actual active table. There happens to be, I know the data, some zeros in there, that happens to be dividends, okay? So we don't want the dividends, okay? So if we go back to the pipeline, we can see it's here. Now, the interesting thing I want to tell you, be careful when this is a delta table. Delta tables underneath are made out of Parquet tables in JSON. If you load one row at a time, it's going to take forever. I estimated like 51 hours to process 600,000 records. With this one, I created 5 different actual files. And what's going to do, it's only going to take about 5 minutes, okay? So we can see in this one, we're going to get a listing, right? So we can do browse, hopefully, and hit OK, and hopefully it brings it up. We'll see if the connection works, I hope. Doesn't allow me to do it. I don't see why it says current file settings. Okay, let's run this and see if it hopefully works. So we're going to do the combined directory, and yep, it did finally see it. Found the 5 files in the POC bucket on GCP. Okay. So we're going to run that, let that run in the background. What else do we want to do? Yeah, I want to talk about size matters, okay? So with Delta table, sizes matters. I did some testing. From AWS, if I want to copy one table at a time, okay, one file, which has 250 rows, one would say that'd be tiny data. Guess what? Takes 77 seconds. You know why? It's a REST API call. It's not as quick. Also, you have to do, like I said, every time you add to a Delta file, you're adding a new Parquet file, you're doing some JSON files, you're updating metadata. Guess what? Takes it. There's 508 different files because there's 508 different stickers, stock tickers for that year. Multiply the math out, 10 hours to load. Wow, that took a long time, right? Same thing again, right? We can look at AWS, 10 hours, GCP, it's even worse, 11 hours. For some reason, because you're in Azure, there's no extra hops through routers. It's only 44 seconds, but still 8 hours, okay? Guess what? GCP, if I do this new technique, one file is 57 seconds, but it takes 5 files to load them all. But there's a copy into statement. And we're going to talk about that next. That's the winner. 12 seconds execution, okay? So we're going to build pubs, and we're going to do that. This one we can see right now, it's actually right in the middle of a copy, right? So I got about 5 minutes, so we can see it's doing Google copy, Google storage location. And we can see that I'll let that go. I'm going to bring up the other warehouse and see if we can wrap this up. Okay, so workspace, pubs. Okay, so we got the pubs database. It's been out there forever, right? And basically it's a bunch of files right here. Let's load it, okay? Now, one of the things I did notice here is we can do drop objects, and basically this is going to get rid of our everything. So again, I'm doing something risky. And oof, it's gone. Okay, gone. Uh-oh. Make the idea about it. The interesting thing is this was done by former MVP. He's down under. I want to make sure Greg Lowe got his name right. And the main thing is that I translated it and it works now in here, right? Azure Data Warehouse. But before it was on SQL 6.5, okay? A few things to note. Not enforced. You have to do that everywhere. Anywhere there was an ID, auto increment, you have to fix it, right? There might be a little massaging when it comes to insert statements, but I'm just going to hit run, okay? This is going to run it off. And voila, we're rebuilding everything. And in a minute, I'll show you what it is. And we'll even actually look at the store procedures. And then I'll wrap up with the copy into and show you a bug that I hope Microsoft fixes. I did put it in a couple times request to get it fixed. And hopefully they fix it. So it's still running. And if we look at tables, no, it's not letting me look. We hit refresh. Nope, not yet. There we go. Got our tables. And now it's refreshing it with the data. I'm going to poke over here and take a look. Upcoming sessions. Awesome. So, yeah, there are more questions. I did this one. And I already did. I'm aware of data flow can, but can this collapse the folder structure? Yeah, I haven't looked at the folder structures for Gen 2 is what the wrangling data flow versus mapping. And what I've done is I've done it through the API call. So you might want to take a look at the API call. It gives you a lot more flexibility. Okay. So this one is actually all done. We can see everything's here. Let's take a look at the query. Don't look at my storage account keys. Okay. So I could do another one, but I'm multitasking. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a table here. Okay. We're going to say, if exist, let me see if I got stocks. Do I got the schema? That's the only problem that might happen. So we got schema, we got stocks. Awesome. Tables, we got S&P 500. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the table. Okay. And then I'm going to recreate the table. Okay. And I'm going to show you two things. First thing is, this is a valid naming convention. Okay. S&P 500 ampersand. Okay. This is a correct secret. Don't copy it, please. I'll have to probably delete it later. And guess what? I can run this. And I'm going to run it. And let's look. Hey, there's no data sets. But I know there's data sets there. Why? The problem is it's using a storage account secret with this file naming. And guess what? For some reason, it just doesn't like it. And it's a bug I put in. Okay. Guess what? We can rename the file folder to YR 2013 instead of the dash and the ampersand. And again, that is valid up there because it did load into this. This is the copy statement. Whoops. Remember I said it takes 12 seconds to load? It rocks. So if you need to load data in the warehouse, the way to go. and it's going to read, this is reading 2,500 plus different tables, 635,000 rows, okay? And it takes about 12 seconds. Whoa, right? And then what we can do is we can run a count, and it's done. Okay, let's go back to the last example, and I apologize for the, Lakehouse didn't work, something messed up. Take a look at my articles. It is published on SQL Server Central, and it's there. So we did do a GCP2 Fabric copy, okay? And it did load it, okay? And look, it did 5 minutes. And we can take a look at the execution, and we can see the number of rows read. So I made one file. This is the reason why it goes fast, is because instead of having 500 files per year, I made one file that had 128,000 rows, okay? And the duration, see, that's 26 seconds. That's where your time is getting, the REST API call, the create, it's taking 20 seconds. The actual inserting of some data, especially a small record, takes a bunch of time. And that's why we see there's such bad performance. So use big files. Okay, summary. Microsoft is a one-stop shop for all your data and analytical needs. It's basically software as a service, right? You can pick an architecture, Lakehouse, data warehouse, machine learning, Custo database for real time. What I didn't show you is to use Copilot. The only drawback I saw was that F64 SKU is needed for Copilot without any pre-purchasing. It's about $8K a month. If you talk to your sales rep, you can pre-buy it at $4K or $5K roughly. Again, don't quote me on the numbers. Talk to your Microsoft guy. That's roughly about what you'd be paying for Power BI anyways. And guess what? Everything is going to Fabric. So if you have Power BI service now, it will be in Fabric next year. I logged a bunch of bugs. Hopefully they're getting fixed. Like I showed you a few ones I saw. Basically, they're going to be adding more sources. If you've seen, you can now mirror databases into the lake. And basically, if you know SQL, which I've done forever, Python, Spark, you'll be right at home. And basically, the future's bright. So I'm all done. Is there any questions? There's a bunch of additional. I'll go really quickly. Slides down here. This is out on my GitHub repo. So everything I talked to tonight will be out there. I can put a new copy out there, but it's definitely available.